The millionaire single dad stood speechless when the waitress taught his disabled son photography, never imagining that those shooting angles would produce a groundbreaking photo exhibition and spread a unique perspective across America. Hello to my wonderful audience. Get ready for a story that will move your heart. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel if you find yourself swept up in this journey, and leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's amazing to see people from all around the world joining us today. Harlan Brooks was once a name that commanded the attention of the entire creative world. From iconic fashion campaigns to high-paying shoots with A-list stars, he wielded the power of visual influence. One of his photographs once sold for $400,000. He was not merely a photographer, but a self-made millionaire who built Brooks Visualsa Studio that dominated Hollywood's imaging trends for nearly a decade. Yet now he sat in a modest diner at the foot of Hollywood Hills, a relic no one recognized. The world had changed. Handheld devices, social media algorithms, automated filters, and editing apps had left his studio behind. Former clients never returned. His protégés scattered and launched their own brands. The collections that once defined him now lay dormant on forgotten hard drives. Beside him was Finn's 11-year-old son, born deaf. The boy never responded to calls and wouldn't meet anyone's gaze for more than 3 seconds. Harlan had tried teaching composition, lighting, the rule of thirds, but Finn never engaged. He didn't resist, simply remained silent. A relentless, nearly absolute quiet. His wheelchair bearing his frail body, his eyes glued to the phone screen, the only medium through which he chose to approach the world. Harlan, who once led crews of hundreds, now felt powerless even to communicate with his own son. Whenever he raised a camera to photograph Finn, the boy would tilt his head away, no tears, no anger. Only a cold refusal that made Harlan's hand falter. The inability to enter his son's world wounded and bewildered him and sometimes left him feeling guilty. As Harlan placed his order, his gaze habitually flicked to Finn. Suddenly, the boy adjusted his phone, set the shot, and tapped the shutter. No word of explanation, this was Finn's reflex. Instinctive, fluid, and uncannily precise. The server arrived with coffee and a plate of toast. Her name was Sloane Reed, about 25, bearing the careful grace of someone formally trained but living an unexpected life. As she set the coffee down, her eyes inadvertently landed on Finn's screen. She froze, not from curiosity, but from astonishment. The photo Finn had just taken, tight composition, natural light slicing across the shoulder of the silent man, creating unforced yet striking depth. No embellishment, no gimmicks, just a moment captured perfectly, overwhelmingly so. She'd learned this technique in a photography class at UCLA. One of those rare instances when composition and emotion converge beyond reason. What unsettled her most, the child neither looked up, asked permission, nor introduced himself. Harlan noticed her reaction. The waitress, a stranger, regarded Finn's photo with the same curiosity, admiration, and bafflement once reserved for him by creative directors. His heart raced, not out of simple pride but from a rising intuition. Perhaps in Finn's silence and this young woman's attention lay something more vital than art itself. Harlan hadn't spoken, but he understood. Finn had just created something that Harlan, the millionaire photographer who believed he understood every nuance of visual emotion, could never teach. And Sloane, this unknown waitress, might have inadvertently stepped into a pivotal role in the journey to save not just his career, but the frayed bond between father and son. Harlan Brooks could not take his eyes off that frame. Finn's photograph haunted him all afternoon. He had worked with the finest shooters in the industry, reviewed thousands of portfolios, witnessed technically perfect angles crafted by masterful skill, but Finn's shot was different. It wasn't flawless by professional standards, yet it brimmed with raw emotion, genuine vibration, untouched by filters. And most haunting of all was the waitress's reaction, a young woman whose quiet, world-weary gaze paused on the image, as if encountering something deeply familiar and painfully poignant from her own past. Harlan was unaccustomed to not understanding. His life had been built on reading emotion through light, knowing when to click, when to pull back. But that young woman's eyes told him he needed to know more. The next day, he returned to the diner. He didn't order right away. He simply sat and waited for her to appear. When she passed by, he nodded briefly, saying nothing. Instead, he struck up a conversation with the diner's manager, a woman of middle age who clearly cared for Sloane. From that brief chat, Harlan gradually pieced together the fragments of a memory that was not his own. Sloane Reed had been an outstanding photography student at UCLA. Instructors praised her for rare vision, the ability to see loneliness within crowds or turn a street corner into a story. Her work had been exhibited in student shows, noted for its emotional depth rare in someone so young, but she dropped out in her final year. No official explanation. Only that her sister died after a long battle with illness, and thereafter, Sloane vanished from exhibitions, never speaking of photography again. Harlan felt his hand clench. Something in her story mirrored his own talent halted by an unexpected tragedy, the death of a loved one, the retreat from the spotlight, the ensuing silence. Sloane was like an old film he had shelved because he lacked the courage to play it back. That afternoon, when Sloane walked past, Harlan looked up and asked one simple question that steered clear of the past. "I still don't understand. How did you recognize that technique?" She paused for several seconds, seeming to weigh avoidance against honest reply. Then, instead of speaking, she opened her bag and withdrew a worn notebook, its spine frayed, pages yellowed with age. She set it on the table and flipped through a few pages each bearing hand-sketched shot diagrams, notes on lighting, subject placement, expected emotion. "That angle, I drew it, back when I was at UCLA," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. Harlan touched the page as if touching a portion of her past she hesitated to share. The rough yet precise lines showed this was no passing hobby. It was part of her part folded away beneath the white apron she wore each day to hide from the question, "Why do you do this job?" He did not ask why she abandoned photography. No need. He recognized in her stillness, the bowed head when someone discovers Finn's photo eyes that once dreamed far, but learned to shrink to survive. I'm not sure I can shoot anymore," she said, hesitation in her gaze. "You don't need to shoot," Harlan replied. "Just help me understand. And help Finn. He can't hear me, but he seems to hear images." Sloane was silent for a long time. A breeze stirred the page she had yet to close. That sketch matched Finn's photograph from yesterday, only the sketch held a trace of hope. Finally, she nodded. Not necessarily because she believed she was ready to return, but driven by something she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was Finn's eyes she may not speak, but he feels. Or perhaps it was the earnest ache in Harlan's voice, a father seemingly spent, yet not yet defeated. Sloane did not voice her agreement, but the next morning, she brought the notebook with her, and Harlan understood. Something was awakening again, emerging from silence. A dream not utterly shattered, merely sleeping briefly. The studio sits quietly within a white building in the heart of Beverly Hills. No signage, no fanfare, just a frosted glass entrance leading into what was once Harlan Brooks's creative sanctuary. In its heyday, models, artists, and fashion editors bustled through here. Today, the space remains clean and orderly, yet silent, mirroring its founder's mood. Harlan opened the door for Sloane with a polite, understated gesture, as if this were merely a test. In truth, he had replayed this moment all night. At the back of the studio, where soft, natural light filters through high windows, was Finn's workstation. A low table, a child-friendly camera permanently mounted, and a large screen so he could review his photos instantly. This was Harlan's silent gift to his son. Control that Finn had never known, granted not by words, but by images. Sloane entered with the discreet caution of someone once attuned to the studio's rhythm but long since removed from it. Without prompt, she retrieved the white apron from her bag, folded it neatly, and set it aside. Every movement was light, yet confident. As she approached Finn, he leaned back, clutching the table's edge, eyes downturned. She said nothing. She simply sat beside him, placed her worn notebook on the table, and flipped to an old sketch, a high-angle shot with horizontal lighting from the left. Then, with a few simple gestures, she indicated that Finn should position the camera accordingly. Finn hesitated, then complied. Not swiftly, but he did not withdraw his hand or turn away. That small step surpassed anything Harlan had achieved in 2 years. That morning unfolded in silencino spoken words, only the soft clicks of the camera and occasional key taps as Finn selected images on the screen. Yet something was shifting. From behind the control room glass door, Harlan watched clearly. His son's face was no longer distant. At moments, Finn's lips curved ever so slightly, not a full smile, but a quiet satisfaction, the look of someone who has found what he seeks and knows how to share it with the world. In the days that followed, they met again not by appointment, but by feeling. Whenever Finn was ready, he returned to the table. And Sloane always arrived early, booted up the camera, and prepared a few sample shots as gentle prompts never imposing. She observed, made subtle adjustments by hand, or jotted down a few icons in her visual shorthand to guide Finn. Sometimes she let him take full control, nodding softly when a shot was right. They were learning a private language, a wordless dialogue where understanding flowed without speech. One afternoon, as the daylight softened, Sloane sat alone browsing Finn's latest series. Her gaze halted on one image, nothing more than a glass on a wooden table, light slanting across to cast crisp reflections. Yet its composition, depth of field, and the sense of emptiness it conveyed sent a chill through her. This was more than a pretty photo, was a visual anchor, the kind every advertising campaign craves. She printed the image and brought it into the control room. Harlan was intently editing a slide deck for an unfinished interior design campaign, desperately searching for a lead shot. When he saw Finn's photo, he fell silent for a long moment. Not out of surprise, but as if rescued from murky creative stagnation. Sloane looked at him. No words were needed. Inside, she knew, this boy did more than take pictures. He was speaking through light, composition, and color. And the miracle was that each day, Finn's voice grew more precise. No words, yet the emotion radiated. That evening, Harlan stood outside the workspace door, watching a scene he had thought impossible. His sonth boy he'd believed unreachable was now reaching others. And Sloaneath, a woman whose dreams had slumbered in that old notebook, was the one who awakened it. He felt his chest tighten, not in pain, but in hope he had not dared to nurture for a long time. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or sip some water, then stay tuned for more unexpected developments. Comment number 1 if you enjoyed the story, so we know you're still here. Day by day, Harlan found he could no longer deny Sloane's special presence in his and his son's life. At first, he believed she was merely someone who'd suffered loss and by chance understood Finn in a way he himself could not. But after weeks working together in the studio, he realized this was no longer simple assistance. It was a rare connection, fragile, profound, and as silent as Finn's own visual language. Harlan sat at the editing desk, eyes tracking Finn's newest images appearing on the screen. The subtle tones, the contemplative composition, the way light seemed poured in from some distant place, everything exuded a calmness that was not sadness. Finn was not simply taking photos, he was telling stories, wordless tales that made viewers pause. Sloane stood beside him, holding a long-cooled cup of tea, observing with him. She spoke little, merely tweaking contrast now and then or suggesting a different crop. But it was her patient, gentle presence that strangely opened Finn's heart. Whenever she leaned toward him, pointing at the screen, Finn tipped his head and allowed his lips to curl into a quiet smile, something Harlan once believed impossible. One evening, as the studio lights softened and only the slow hum of the fan remained, they selected shots to test print. Sloane, her gaze thoughtful, suddenly proposed something unexpected. We should use these very images for that interior campaign. This is a language the digital market hasn't yet learned to copy. Harlan looked up, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew the value of an image, the power of emotion in each frame, but he also knew the risk. Finn was opening up. If they used his photos in a high-stakes campaign and then failed, it might drive the boy back into silence forever. And deeper still, was he father who'd felt helpless exploiting this fragile moment to salvage his own career? He fell silent for a long moment, and the entire room seemed to pause. Yet when his eyes met Sloane's steady and unwavering, knew he could not turn away. In her was not only faith in Finn, but loyalty to the truth she sensed in every shot. A loyalty, No market, investor, or algorithm could replace. Finally, he nodded. Not for the campaign, but because he chose to trust his instinct in the invisible bond between that woman and his son. In that instant, his hand brushed lightly over hers. A simple gesture of thanks, but the touch froze their breath. Neither withdrew. A slow heartbeat later, their eyes met. No words, no reasons, just a soft kiss, fleeting as an unspoken memory, unhurried, in perfect time. But immediately, Sloane stepped back. Her eyes held no reproach, only pain. Her voice caught, so low it was nearly a whisper, "I can't let myself fail again." Then she turned away, not crying, not blaming, just leaving the studio, as if one more second there would cost her something far more fragile than a broken dream. The door closed behind her, and in the resulting emptiness, Harlan heard only the steady whir of the ceiling fan and a hollow ache in his chest. The next day, Finn did not come to his workstation. He sat in a corner, not looking at his camera, not selecting photos, not smiling. The unfinished images lay silent in his folder, as though the flow of emotion had been cut. Harlan approached and sat beside his son this time, without a hand on his shoulder, without urging. He simply stared at the blank screen, then looked beyond it to the spot where Sloane would have stood, as always. And he understood. It was not the studio that had lost its light, it was the loss of the one who brought light to them. Harlan found it increasingly impossible to deny Sloane's unique presence in their lives. At first, he thought she was merely someone who'd endured loss and somehow understood Finn in a way he never could. But after weeks together in the studio, he realized this had become more than simple support. It was a rare connection. Fragile, profound, and as silent as Finn's image-based communication. One early morning, Harlan brought Finn back to the little diner tucked beneath Hollywood, the place where it all began. The familiar atmosphere remained, the clink of cups, the faint aroma of coffee, a few young artists scribbling in notebooks, but this time, Harlan didn't order anything. He sat quietly, letting Finn take out his phone, prop it on the small stand, and survey the scene. Sloane was bent over clearing dishes from a distant table. Her hair was tied hastily, sleeves rolled up, her steps steady, yet heavier than before. Harlan noticed the tiredness in her eyes, not physical weariness, but the silent torment of having abandoned a passion still beating in her heart. When she looked up and caught sight of Finn intently framing his shot, his hand trembling in excitement, Sloane froze, the tray in her hand tilted, nearly slipping, yet her gaze never left his. No words were exchanged, just a long look between her and Finn's familiar movements. He was arranging light exactly as she had taught him. It felt like an unspoken call to return. At that moment, Harlan's phone buzzed. An email from a major Los Angeles art gallery. Finn Brooks's photograph, Silent Morning, has been selected for the New Voices of Visual Language exhibition. The event will host thousands of viewers, both in person and online. Harlan turned to Sloane and held up his screen. He said nothing further. She read it, and her eyes shifted from astonishment to fear. She understood the pressure of a major exhibition, what it means to be stared at by critical eyes, to step into the spotlight only to feel unprepared. But then she looked at Finn. His eyes seemed to await an answer, and all her reason melted away. Sloane nodded, slowly but decisively. On exhibition day, the space buzzed with excitement. Finn's photographs were printed large and hung with finesse against white walls, lights positioned to reveal depth without disturbing the innate stillness. Each image froze a moment in time. An empty chair bathed in afternoon sun, a child's hand gripping a camera strap, a solitary shadow in a waiting room. None featured a clear subject, yet each overflowed with emotion. Sloane stood beside Finn, no longer hidden behind her apron or notebook. She wore a simple black dress, her hair tied back lightly, her eyes calm as she introduced each photograph to attendees. She spoke not of technique but of feeling. Finn cannot speak, but his photos are his language. He hears through light and answers through composition. The audience fell silent. Then applause erupted, not merely at the talent of a deaf child, but because they saw themselves reflected in those images. Loneliness, the longing to be understood, and a small hope always finding its way into the light. Online, views skyrocketed, comments flooded social media, and the press began calling Finn the silent eye of a new era. Brooks Visuals, once near collapse, received a flood of collaboration offers. But for Harlan, the most important moment came when he stood amid the crowd, watching Finn lift his head, eyes shining with recognition. And beside him, Sloane smiled the smile he had feared he would never see again. He approached her quietly, whispering so only she could hear, "You didn't just save the studio, you saved our future." Sloane looked at him. She said nothing, but tears slowly traced down her cheek. Not from regret, but because she realized she had reclaimed what she thought was lost, her passion and the courage to follow it once more. The scent of fresh ink still lingered on the long studio table, the distinctive aroma of beginnings, of first prints still damp and raw, not yet framed. Harlan stood motionless in that space, his eyes fixed on Finn, the once silent child who had shut himself away, now cradling his small camera with trembling yet assured hands. He sat in his wheelchair, dark brown hair lit by soft window light, his face as calm as ever. Only today, he held in his hand a gift he had crafted himself, a wooden handcrafted camera, its strap engraved with Sloane's name. Not far away, Sloane watched. Gone was the old apron, replaced by a neutral-toned vest. Her hair fell gently over one shoulder, and her gaze no longer hid behind shyness. She was no longer the waitress who avoided others' eyes, nor the student who dropped out after her grief. She was an artist, a guide the living proof that sometimes you must lose everything to realize what truly matters. Harlan stepped forward, hand brushing his jacket pocket. There lay the small object he'd prepared for days, a silver pin etched with a classic camera lensa symbol not just of photography, but of the journey they had shared. A journey that began in helplessness and isolation, then found connection through a frame, a look, and one fateful shutter click. He handed it to Sloane. No grand speech, just a hoarse whisper, choked by emotion from the depths of his heart. "Together we will share Finn's vision with the world." She was still for a moment, then took the pin with both hands, as if clutching a promise. As she fastened it to her lapel, she felt its engraved weight settle into her skin, a silent vow that from now on, she would never walk alone. Not long after, they opened a charitable gallery in Los Angeles's revitalized arts district. No glitz, no lofty slogans, just an open, light-filled space where Finn's photographs hung at eye level, exactly as he saw the world. The images spoke not of absence but of feeling. An empty chair bathed in afternoon glow. Small feet planted amid a bustling walkway. A single lock of hair stirred by the breeze, all fragments seen through the eyes of a deaf child living in silence, yet entirely resonant. Every exhibition was free. Every online view translated into donations for organizations helping disabled children pursue the arts. From a few hundred visitors at first, the gallery's reach grew into millions of views. It became a beacon for art schools, creative forums, and even sparked a new wave of street photography where young people began telling their stories through personal perspectives, unbound by convention. Finn still did not speak, but whenever he adjusted his camera angle, a new story unfolded. That day, as he repositioned the tripod and tilted the lens toward the slanted window light, Sloane stood beside him, her eyes soft with hope for the future. From behind, Harlan did not intrude. He simply watched in silence because he understood. This was no longer just art, this was family. They were no longer three souls divided by pain, failure, or distance. They were a team, a quiet affirmation that creativity is not just for admiring, but for changing the way the world sees itself. And there, in that shaft of light on the gallery floor, Harlan reflected on all they had endured, from a small diner, from a chance photograph, to a nationwide exhibition. It had all begun with a child who never spoke, yet carried a vision no one had ever seen. The lesson was as clear as the light through a lens. Every child carries an entire world within. You only need the patience to listen, to see through their eyes. And that story is far from over. For every time Finn lifts his camera, a new chapter is just beginning.